My name is Amy Mason, 34 years old. I survived an IED blast in the Middle East, but the deadliest wound was waiting for me back home. I woke up at Walter Reed, waiting for the husband I had just informed about an $11 million inheritance. But Julian never came. Weeks later, he walked in, and he wasn't alone. He coldly handed me power of attorney papers, saying a TBI had left me mentally incompetent, but that humiliation was nothing. His new wife suddenly stared at me, then screamed the words that would tear my world apart forever. If you've ever been betrayed at your lowest point, hit like and let me know where you're watching from. This is the story of how I took back everything: my honor, my fortune, and the daughter my enemy was using in ways I could never have imagined. The first thing I registered wasn't his face, but the scent of expensive cologne cutting through the sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital room. It was a sharp, arrogant scent I didn't recognize, and it was wrong. Everything felt wrong. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor next to my bed had been my only companion for weeks, a lonely metronome counting out the seconds of my abandonment. Now, it felt like a countdown clock. Julian finally came into view. He wasn't wearing the worried, rumpled clothes of a concerned husband. He was wearing a brand new, buttery soft leather jacket, the kind I knew for a fact we couldn't afford. It screamed of money I didn't know he had. He moved with the predatory confidence of a hunter, his eyes not meeting mine. Instead, they scanned the array of medical equipment surrounding me: the IV drips, the monitors, the complex traction system holding my shattered leg together. It was the detached appraisal of someone checking the condition of a piece of damaged goods before a final transaction. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was assessing an asset, or perhaps a liability. Trailing just behind him was a young woman, maybe in her late teens or early 20s. She was the complete opposite of Julian's polished veneer. Dressed in a simple, well-worn sweater and jeans, she clutched her hands together, her wide, hopeful eyes darting around the room, filled with a nervous energy that seemed entirely out of place. She looked at me with a painful mix of hope and apprehension. I tried to push myself up on my elbows, a mistake that sent a bolt of white-hot agony shooting up from my leg, a searing reminder of the roadside bomb that had put me here. I bit back a cry, my breath catching in my throat. But that physical pain, as intense as it was a dull ache compared to the cold dread coiling in my stomach. Julian saw me flinch, but his expression remained a mask of indifference. "Hey, Amy," he began, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used on gallery owners, not on the woman he'd vowed to love in sickness and in health. He stepped closer, placing a sleek briefcase on the rolling bedside table, the click of the latches echoing in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. "Listen, I've been talking with the doctors." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "The TBI, it's affected your judgment, your cognitive functions." He slid the documents across the table until they were next to my hand. It was a power of attorney. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the intent was brutally clear. He was erasing me. "This is just temporary," he continued, the lie sliding effortlessly from his lips. "So I can handle things, manage the assets from Uncle Sterling's estate. It's for your own good, really." His words were a calculated assault, each one designed to strip away another layer of my identity. He wasn't just my husband, he was speaking to Captain Amy Mason, United States Army. I had commanded soldiers in combat zones. I had made life and death decisions under fire. And now, this man, this failed artist who I had supported for years, was treating me like a confused child, a broken toy to be managed. He was stripping me of my rank, my honor, and my very personhood, right here in a room paid for by the military I had served. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The beeping of the monitor beside me remained steady, a cold, indifferent witness to my execution. I was still reeling, trying to form a word, any word, to fight back against the sheer audacity of it all, when the girl, Syrah, suddenly froze. Her nervous energy sharpened into a laser focus. Her eyes were locked on my face, specifically on a faint, silvery line on my right temple. A tiny, crescent moon-shaped scar I'd had since I was a kid. A stupid fall from a bicycle. It was barely noticeable. Most people never saw it. But she saw it. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror. That scar, she stammered, her voice a choked whisper. She took an involuntary step forward. Julian's composure finally cracked. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her sweater. Sarah, let's go. We're done here. His voice was a low, urgent hiss, but it was too late. She shook him off, her hands trembling as she fumbled in her purse, pulling out a worn, creased photograph. It was old, the colors faded. She held it up, her wide, terrified eyes flicking back and forth between the picture and my face. The girl in the photo was younger, her face unlined by war and pain, but it was me. The scar was there. A strangled sob escaped her lips. It can't be, she wailed, the sound tearing through the sterile silence of the room. She turned on Julian, her voice rising to a raw, accusing scream. It can't be. Julian told me my mother was dead. He said he found me to carry out her last wish. The world didn't just stop, it shattered. The floor fell away, the ceiling caved in. And all that was left was the roaring in my ears and the piercing sound of that young woman's grief. Julian. He hadn't just betrayed me. He hadn't just come to steal my inheritance. He had unearthed the deepest, most painful secret of my life. A ghost I had buried 17 years ago. And he had weaponized it. He had twisted my greatest tragedy into the cornerstone of his monstrous lie. That girl's scream wasn't an accusation. It was the cry of a manipulated, heartbroken child. My eyes found Julian's, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I had married. I saw a monster, his carefully constructed mask finally ripped away to reveal the vile creature beneath. The heart monitor, my steady companion, finally broke its rhythm. It erupted into a frantic, high-pitched alarm, a screeching siren that mirrored the chaos exploding inside me. The door burst open. Nurses in blue scrubs rushed in, their faces a blur of alarm. Their voices were muffled, distant. The room dissolved into a vortex of noise and motion as they surrounded my bed. But I couldn't see them. I couldn't hear them. All I could see was the wreckage of my life and a single burning question that echoed in the screaming silence of my mind. How did it all come to this? The chaos in my hospital room eventually subsided, replaced by the dull hum of machinery and the sterile quiet that had been my world for weeks. They gave me something for the pain. Or maybe it was for the shock. The edges of my vision softened, and the sharp, jagged pieces of the present moment began to drift apart. Lying there, pinned to the bed by my own broken body, my mind clung to that one ragged question. How? How did it all come to this? My thoughts drifted away from the cold chill of Walter Reed, pulled back by an anchor of memory to a different kind of heat, a different kind of pain. Pulled back across an ocean, across a continent, to the suffocating sun-baked dust of Afghanistan. It all started there. In a command tent that smelled of canvas, sweat, and burnt electricity. I remember the oppressive heat, so thick you could taste it, and the fine, gritty sand that got into everything. Your clothes, your food, your lungs. I was poring over satellite intel, sweat stinging my eyes when the mail came in. Among the usual letters from home was a thick, formal-looking envelope from a law firm in New York. It was about my uncle, Sterling Mason, my father's estranged younger brother. The deserter, my father, a 3-star general, used to call him. Sterling had committed the ultimate sin in the Mason family. He had chosen boardrooms over battlefields, building a billion-dollar tech empire instead of collecting military honors. He was the family disappointment, and secretly, my hero. He had passed away. A sudden heart attack on his yacht. The letter informed me that he had left me a significant portion of his estate. Tucked inside was a personal, handwritten note from him, the paper crisp and expensive under my calloused fingers. Amy, it read, your father always said I ran from a fight. He's wrong. I just chose a different battlefield. I see the Mason resolve in you, kid, but without the blindness that afflicts the rest of them. Use what I've left you to build a life, not just to follow orders. Your own life. Tears mixed with the sweat on my face as I read his words. It was the kind of validation, the kind of permission to be myself, that I had never once received from my own father. It felt like a posthumous blessing, a beam of light in the dusty darkness of that tent. I had a chance at a different future. We had a chance. I had to tell Julian. I found a secure satellite phone and dialed his number back in New York. My heart was pounding with a mixture of grief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. When he picked up, I told him about Sterling first, about the sadness I felt for the uncle I barely knew but deeply admired. Julian made the right noises, a few practiced, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorries," but his sympathy felt thin, transparent, like he was just waiting for me to get to the point. "So," he said after a perfunctory pause, his voice suddenly sharp, focused. "What about the will?" The question hung in the air between continents, cold and sharp. I told him. "He left me $11 million, Julian." Silence. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing but the faint static of the satellite connection. It was a loaded silence, a calculating silence. I know that now. Back then, I thought he was just shocked. Then his voice exploded through the receiver, a performance of pure, unadulterated joy. "Oh my God, Amy, that's incredible. Honey, this is it. This is everything." His words tumbled out, a frantic, selfish cascade. "I can finally open my sculpture studio. A real one. We'll buy a penthouse in Soho. You can get out of the army for God's sake. We can finally live a real life." He kept saying, "we," but all I could hear was me, me, me. His dreams, his studio, his life. It was a jarring contrast. Him planning a life of luxury in a New York penthouse, while I sat sweating in a war zone, surrounded by the constant threat of death. Lying in my hospital bed now, the memory is tainted, overlaid with the truth. The phone call was just one moment, but it illuminated 1,000 others. I thought back to our life before that last deployment, to all those cold dinners he complained about. He painted himself as the long-suffering artist, sacrificing his career for my military service. The truth was, he was a man paralyzed by his own mediocrity. His sacrifices usually involved him networking in trendy Soho bars, spending my deployment pay on expensive Italian marble for sculptures he never finished, or exotic woods for projects he never started. He blamed my absence for his lack of success, but the real chains holding him down were his own laziness and lack of talent. And I, desperate for a family and a life outside the rigid structure of the military, had willingly lied to myself. I called it an artistic temperament. He called it my fault. The memory of the phone call comes back into sharp focus. Just before we hung up, Julian's tone shifted again, becoming conspiratorial, almost a whisper. "Hey, babe," he said. "Let's keep this under our hats for now. Okay? Especially from your family. You know how they can be. They'll just complicate things." At the time, I thought he was being protective. My father, the general, would have certainly seen the money as a corrupting influence, a distraction from my duty. I thought Julian was shielding me, creating a space for us. But now, floating on a sea of morphine in the wreckage of my life, I understand. He wasn't shielding me. He was isolating me. He wasn't protecting our future. He was eliminating any rival claimants to his prize. He wasn't a partner. He was a predator. The plan, the whole monstrous, cruel deception, didn't begin when he walked into my hospital room with another woman. It began the moment he heard the number 11 million. It was born in that 3-second pause, a poisoned seed planted via satellite, a lie that traveled halfway around the world to find fertile ground in my own naive hope. The days bled into nights, and the nights bled back into days. My world shrank to the 4 sterile walls of my room, to the geography of my hospital bed, and to the relentless, tidal pull of pain. Morphine was a constant, a heavy, syrupy fog that dulled the sharpest edges of agony but never truly made it disappear. It plunged me into a half-life of waking nightmares and drugged, dreamless sleep. Every day was a battle fought on a microscopic scale. The surgeons had saved my leg, a fact they repeated with pride, but it no longer felt like mine. It was a foreign object, a cage of titanium screws and steel plates bolted to my own bones, mapped with a grotesque network of scars. Just learning to sit up on the edge of the bed was a monumental task that left me drenched in sweat, gasping for air, every nerve fiber screaming in protest. Julian never called. He never sent a text. I tried calling him once, early on, only to be met with the flat, impersonal tone that told me my number had been blocked. To the world, to the man I had married, I had ceased to exist. The physical pain was a constant, grinding reality. But the pain of being forgotten was sharper, colder, more cruel. I was a decorated officer, a wounded hero, but I felt like a piece of broken equipment, discarded and left to rust in a forgotten corner of a supply depot. My nights were the worst. The ghost came out in the dark. Sometimes it was the ghost of the battlefield, the flash of the IED, the ringing in my ears, the smell of burnt sand and metal. Other times it was the ghost in my own leg. Phantom pains, the doctors called them. My leg would seize and burn and ache in places that were numb, my brain screaming signals to muscles that no longer obeyed. And then there was the ghost of Julian's face, twisted into that monstrous sneer, and the ghost of a young girl's scream, echoing in the silence. My physical therapist was Major Eva Rostova. She was a Russian-American woman, built like a bulldog, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a gravelly voice thick with an accent from the old country. She wasn't the hand-holding, you can do it type. There were no hollow platitudes, no gentle encouragement. She was all business. Her hands, though, for all their strength, were surprisingly gentle as she manipulated my ruined leg, testing for any flicker of response. She pushed me to my absolute limit, then one step beyond. Pain is weakness leaving the body, Captain, she'd say, her voice a low rumble, as I struggled to lift my leg even a single inch. She saw the emptiness in my eyes, the hollowed-out look of a soldier who had surrendered. It was a look more dangerous than any physical wound, and she recognized it instantly. One evening, long after her shift had ended, Eva came into my room. She didn't turn on the main light, just the small reading lamp by my bed. She pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression unreadable. I called a friend at the Pentagon, she said without any preamble. Her directness was like a splash of cold water. I had him check your service record. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Your official status is KIA, killed in action. I stared at her, the words not making sense. KIA? But I was here. I was alive. Your husband, she continued, her voice flat, clinical, has already collected your death benefits, the full amount from your SGLI life insurance. Each word was a nail being hammered into a coffin lid. My coffin. He remarried 2 weeks ago, to a girl named Serafina Hayes. He's been using his story, the grieving widower of a fallen American hero, to fundraise from veterans' charities. The fog of morphine burned away, replaced by a horrifying crystal clarity. Julian hadn't just abandoned me. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had erased me. He had declared me dead, cashed the check, and was now dancing on my grave, using my name, my sacrifice, to build his new life. He had turned my honor into his commodity. I said nothing. I couldn't. I just turned my head and stared out the window at the darkening sky. My eyes as empty and lifeless as the void I felt inside. I was a ghost. A ghost in my own life, haunting a room no one ever visited. That night, my father's favorite Winston Churchill quote echoed in my head. If you're going through hell, he used to say, keep going. But how do you keep going when you're already buried? Eva must have seen the last flicker of light in me die out. She stood up, and I heard the soft clink of plastic on the bedside table. I didn't look. I just kept staring out the window. This is a burner phone, she said quietly. Completely clean, untraceable. When you are ready to fight again, you use it. She paused at the door. Do not let a Chinook, a pup, define a soldier like you, Mason. The words she used, the way she said my last name, it wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. An order from one soldier to another. After she left, I lay in the darkness for a long time, the silence broken only by the steady beep of the monitor. Slowly, painfully, I reached out my arm. my fingers closing around the small, cheap plastic of the phone. It felt cold, heavy. It felt like a weapon. And for the first time in weeks, a spark ignited in the cold, dead ashes of my soul. A tiny, hard, dangerous spark. My battlefield had changed. The enemy had changed. But I was still a soldier. And I would never, ever surrender. If you've ever felt abandoned and had to find the strength to fight back all on your own, hit the like button. And to show Amy she's no longer alone, comment with a simple phrase. Your fight is our fight. In the hazy twilight between consciousness and the chemical abyss of painkillers, I kept dreaming of a baby. It wasn't a specific memory, just a feeling. The phantom weight of a small warm body in the crook of my arm. The scent of milk and powder. It was a soft, recurring dream that offered a strange comfort in the sterile landscape of my waking life. In those moments, waking up was the real nightmare. I'd surface, my mind still thick with morphine, and my hand would instinctively slide under my pillow, searching for the cool, hard edges of a small metal box that wasn't there. It had never been there, not in any barracks or field tent, but in my mind, it was my most precious possession. The memory it held was crystal clear, sharper than any drug-induced fog. A single, dog-eared photograph, its colors fading, the picture of a girl. 17, rail-thin, with haunted eyes and a defiance in her jaw that hadn't yet been beaten out of her. Me. In her arms she held a swaddled newborn. My daughter. That photograph was the only proof she ever existed. The only proof of the secret that had cleaved my life in two. The dream dissolved and the memory took its place, pulling me back to a small, suffocating town in the upper Midwest in the late 90s. It was a place where tradition was law, and the fear of scandal was a physical force, as real as the bitter winter winds. For the Mason family, honor and reputation were everything. And I, daughter of General William Mason, had brought disgrace to his doorstep. My father hadn't shouted. He never did. He delivered his verdict with the cold, dispassionate authority he used to send men into battle. Sitting behind his large mahogany desk, in full-dress uniform, he laid out the operational plan. The baby, he said, was a mistake to be erased. An error in judgment to be corrected swiftly and silently. He had already made the arrangements, a private adoption through a discreet agency. No records, no names, a clean break. There is no place for disgrace in the Mason family, he said, his voice as hard and unyielding as the metals on his chest. It wasn't a discussion, it was a direct order. I remember looking at my mother. She stood by the window, her back to us, her shoulders trembling with silent, useless tears. She was a good woman, but she was a general's wife first. She would never defy him. I was on my own. The day the nurse came to take her away is a moment frozen in time. The hollow, aching emptiness in my arms where she had been moments before. The finality of it was absolute. My father stood in the doorway, a sentinel guarding the family's honor. He made me promise, right then, that I would never try to find her. Your future is the army, Amy, he said, his eyes devoid of any fatherly warmth. You will serve with distinction. You will make us proud. Do not let this past mistake destroy the life we have planned for you. That promise became my penance, a lead weight I carried in my soul for 17 years. I threw myself into the military, not just to serve, but to atone. I volunteered for the toughest assignments, pushed myself harder than anyone, all in a desperate attempt to become the perfect soldier he demanded. I was trying to prove that my sacrifice, that her sacrifice, had been worth it. That I was worthy of the Mason name, even with the indelible stain of my secret. The army became my life, my identity, my shield. A world of black and white, orders, and objectives. There was no room for the messy gray areas of emotion, until Julian. It was during a short leave back stateside. He was everything my world was not. A freelance artist, chaotic, passionate, free. Where my father saw regulations, Julian saw inspiration. He didn't care about my rank or family name. He looked at me and saw a woman, not a soldier, complimenting the way I laughed, the way my hair caught the light. He filled the gaping void created by my family's conditional love. I clung to him, to his easy affection and promises of a different kind of life. A life where I could be loved for who I was, not the uniform I wore. I believed, with all my heart, this was my chance to build the one thing I craved above all else: a real family. One night, after too much wine, and in a moment of profound vulnerability, I told him everything. About the baby, the promise, the guilt I carried every single day. The confession I had never spoken aloud tumbled out. He didn't flinch. He just held me, stroking my hair as I cried. He whispered that he loved me, that my past didn't matter, that he would be the family I never had. I didn't know it then, but in seeking comfort, I'd handed my greatest enemy the weapon that would one day destroy me. Now, back in the harsh reality of Walter Reed, the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. Sarah's face, contorted in that scream. Julian told me my mother was dead. He said he found me to carry out her last wish. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a pain far deeper than the IED blast. Julian hadn't just found my daughter. He was using her. He was manipulating her grief for a mother she never knew, twisting my own secret shame into a tool for his greed. The betrayal wasn't about the $11 million anymore. It wasn't about our broken marriage or the lies he told. This was a violation on a level I couldn't comprehend. He had taken the most sacred, painful part of my history and desecrated it. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The guilt I had carried for 17 years, that heavy lead weight, began to transform. It wasn't gone, but it was transmuting, hardening into something cold and sharp. It was rage, and it was purpose. This was no longer a fight for my money or my honor. This was a rescue mission. It was about saving the daughter I'd been forced to abandon. The thought filled me with an agony of guilt, but beneath it, a powerful, electrifying strength surged through my veins. It was a reason to endure the pain, to push through the grueling physical therapy, to fight my way out of this bed. I have to live. I have to get strong. I have to get my daughter back. The rage didn't burn out. It banked, glowing hot and steady like the embers of a fire that would not be extinguished. For the first time since waking up in this hospital, I had a mission. The pain in my leg was still a grinding reality. The grief was still a hollow ache in my chest. But they were no longer the focus. They were just conditions on the ground. And a good soldier always adapts to the conditions on the ground. My hand, steady and sure, picked up the burner phone Eva had left me. The plastic felt solid, a tangible link to the world I had been severed from. There was no hesitation. I knew exactly who to call. My fingers dialed the number for the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, the JAG Corps. A tired-sounding operator answered. I kept my voice level, professional. This is Captain Amy Mason. Service number? I recited the digits from memory, a string of numbers that had defined my life for over a decade. I need to speak with an attorney. I am currently a patient at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I took a breath. And according to my service record, I'm dead. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. I could almost hear the operator blinking, rereading his protocols, trying to find the right response for a situation that had never happened before. When he finally spoke, his voice was a full octave higher. Please hold, Captain. Less than 24 hours later, Captain Elias Vance walked into my room. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with a sharp suit, a clean-cut haircut, and the hyper-alert eyes of someone who processes information for a living. The shock was clear on his face, but he suppressed it with practiced discipline. He snapped to a crisp salute. Captain Mason, Captain Vance, JAG Corps. It's an honor to meet you. Likewise, Captain, I said, my voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. Ma'am, he said, his professionalism taking over completely. What I've read in your preliminary file, it's a hell of a mess. That's one word for it, I replied dryly. Let's clean it up, he said, pulling a chair to my bedside and opening a briefcase full of files. My hospital room became a command center. The physical therapy room, with its large rolling whiteboard, became my briefing room. With Vance's help, I asked one of the nurses for some dry erase markers. Between grueling sessions of learning to put weight on my shattered leg, Vance and I planned my counteroffensive. I drew a line down the center of the board. On one side, I wrote, "Friendly Forces." Underneath, CPT, Amy Mason. Meiji, Eva Rostova, Medical Logistics. CPT, Elias Vance, Legal, Offensive. On the other side, I wrote, Hostile Target. Underneath, Julian Croft. The intelligence Vance gathered was chillingly efficient. He confirmed everything Eva had told me and more. Julian had filed for my death benefits using a forged death certificate. He had petitioned the court for control of my uncle's estate. Using my fraudulent military record and the power of attorney papers he had tried to get me to sign. But the masterstroke was his manipulation of Sarah. He had legally registered her as my previously unknown half-sister. A convenient fiction that would give her a claim to the inheritance, a claim he, as her new husband, would control. Julian wasn't just playing checkers, he was playing a long, complex game of chess. He had anticipated every move, covered every angle. "He's insulated himself," Vance said, pacing the room. "He has legal documents, a tragic backstory, and a sympathetic sister-in-law to back him up." I stared at the whiteboard. I remembered something I'd read about Senator John McCain, about how he and other POWs in Vietnam had used their minds as their last line of defense when their bodies were broken and imprisoned. They used intellect and discipline to survive, to resist. My body was a prison right now, but my mind was free, and my mind was a weapon. "Don't treat him like a bad husband, Vance," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Treat him like an enemy combatant. Analyze him." "What are his weaknesses?" Vance stopped pacing. "Greed, arrogance. He thinks he's the smartest person in any room." "Exactly," I said, tapping the whiteboard. "Greed makes him impatient. Arrogance makes him careless. That's our point of entry." The plan we devised was simple, classic military doctrine. We would lure him onto our territory. Walter Reed was my ground, my fortress. It would be our kill zone. I would be the bait. Vance would be the ambush. We would use Julian's own arrogance to lead him straight into the trap. As I looked at the plan laid out on the board, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't a victim. I was a commander. The first move was delicate. With Vance's guidance, I drafted an email. A kind nurse, a specialist who owed me a favor for helping her son with his West Point application essay, agreed to send it for me from a public computer at an internet cafe just outside the base. An anonymous email, untraceable. The subject line read, "Urgent. Mason Estate Inquiry." The body was short and to the point. "There appears to be a discrepancy in the casualty report for CPT Amy Mason. The Pentagon Inspector General's office is opening a preliminary investigation. All assets related to the Sterling Mason inheritance may be frozen pending the outcome." We sent it and waited. We didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, a panicked reply from Julian hit the anonymous account. He was frantic, demanding to know who the sender was, what they knew. He insisted it was all a misunderstanding. He asked for a meeting to clear things up. He suggested a quiet bar in Soho. I smiled. The fish had taken the bait. The nurse helped me send the final reply. "No, the meeting will be at Walter Reed. Let's go back to where the problem started." The day of the meeting, I asked one of the nurses to help me get ready. Not in the standard issue hospital gown, but in my own clothes. Simple black pants and a plain shirt. Over it, I had her help me put on the jacket to my Army service uniform. The deep blue fabric was crisp, the golden braids on the sleeves immaculate. I looked at myself in the small mirror. The dark circles under my eyes were still there, the trauma still etched on my face, but the uniform jacket was like a suit of armor. It reminded me who I was. Captain Amy Mason. Not a patient, not a victim. I was in my wheelchair, positioned by the window, when they arrived. The stage was set. Major Rostova stood quietly in the far corner of the room. her phone angled just so, almost invisible. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor. This was it. The point of no return. Julian and Sarah entered. Julian had tried to look confident, but a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. His eyes darted around the room, assessing for threats. He saw none. He saw only me, a broken soldier in a wheelchair. Sarah trailed behind him like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate, heartbreaking hope. "Amy," Julian began, his voice attempting a gentleness that sounded grotesque. "I'm glad you agreed to this. We just need to get this paperwork sorted out so I can take care of everything." He moved to my bedside table, placing the thick stack of power of attorney documents in front of me, along with a pen. I let my hand tremble as I reached for it. I looked up at him, making my eyes wide and confused. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice a practiced, fragile whisper. "The TBI, things are so foggy, I don't remember things clearly." I picked up the pen. Maybe it's for the best, if I just sign." A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable it was nauseating. The predator, seeing his prey surrender, let his guard down completely. His eyes gleamed with greed as he pushed the papers closer, his finger tapping on the signature line. "Exactly. It's for your own good, sweetheart." He didn't see Eva press the record button. I held the pen over the paper for a long moment. Then, with a quiet, deliberate click, I capped it and set it down on the table. I looked up, and the fog in my eyes was gone, replaced by glacial ice. "But first," I said, my voice suddenly strong, clear, and resonant with command, "you're going to explain a few things to me. Start with the forged death certificate, Julian. Then we can move on to the death benefits you illegally collected. And then, for the grand finale, you can tell me all about your bigamous marriage to this young woman right here." The color drained from Julian's face. He froze, his mouth half open, a statue of pure panic. On cue, the door to my room swung open. Captain Elias Vance stepped inside, his expression grim and resolute. Behind him stood two uniformed military police officers, their presence filling the doorway, solid and immovable. "Julian Croft," Vance's voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp and authoritative. "You are under arrest for felony fraud, falsification of official military documents, and bigamy." Chaos erupted. Julian lunged back, sputtering. "This is insane. She's delusional. The TBI has scrambled her brain, I told you." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's the one who should be locked up." But no one was listening to him. Sarah, who had been silent and shrinking in the background, was now staring, transfixed, at the wall opposite my bed. At my direction, a nurse had hung a single, framed photograph there earlier that morning. An old photo of the Mason family, my father in his general's uniform, my mother, and a teenaged me, awkward and serious. Her eyes darted from the photo to me, then back again. Her hand went to the locket around her neck. With trembling fingers, she opened it, revealing a tiny, worn photograph inside. A picture of a 17-year-old girl holding a newborn baby. She held the locket out, comparing the face in her tiny photo to the teenager in the frame on the wall. They were the same. She looked at me, her eyes wide with dawning, horrific understanding. "It's you," she whispered, the words barely audible. She turned to Julian, her voice rising to a choked cry. "The picture you gave me of my mother. It was her." The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place, and the sheer evil of his plan took my breath away. It wasn't just that he had found my daughter. That was only the beginning. "That's correct," Vance said, stepping forward. He held up a file. "According to the report from the private investigator you hired, Mr. Croft, you discovered Captain Mason's secret. You found her daughter, Sarah. But instead of the truth, you fed her a fantasy. You showed her a picture of her own mother, claimed she was dead, and that you were fulfilling her last wish to find her long-lost daughter." Vance's words were like hammer blows, each one demolishing the last of Julian's lies. You played the grieving widower to the world, and the heroic messenger to Sira. You married her to gain absolute legal control over her, and through her, any claim she might have to the Mason estate. She was never a person to you. She was just a pawn. A terrible guttural sob broke from Sarah as the full weight of the deception crashed down on her. She crumpled into a chair, her body shaking with uncontrollable grief. She hadn't just been lied to. Her entire identity, her entire quest for her mother, had been a carefully constructed fraud. Julian lunged toward me then, his face a mask of pure, desperate rage. "You bitch!" he screamed. He never made it. The two MPs moved with swift, practiced efficiency, grabbing his arms and slamming him against the wall. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed in the silent room. He was still screaming, still spewing threats and denials as they dragged him out, his pathetic rage fading down the hallway. The room was quiet, except for the sound of Sarah's weeping and the steady, calm beep. Beep. Beep of the heart monitor. I had won. If you believe that truth is the ultimate weapon, hit the like button. And to celebrate this moment of justice, comment with one simple word that says it all. Checkmate. The moment the MPs dragged Julian out of the room, it was as if all the sound in the world had been sucked out with him. His pathetic, fading screams were replaced by a silence so heavy, so profound, it felt louder than the chaos that had just ended. The frantic, high-pitched alarm of the heart monitor had been silenced by a nurse, leaving only the steady, rhythmic beep that now seemed to be counting the seconds of this strange new reality. The adrenaline that had been a fire in my veins for the past hour vanished, and in its place, a bone-deep exhaustion settled over me. It was a weight heavier than my shattered leg, heavier than the fatigue of combat. The fight was over. I had won. But the victory tasted like ash in my mouth. My gaze drifted to the young woman huddled in the chair across the room. Sarah, my daughter. She was rocking back and forth slightly, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, ragged sobs. And I felt a new kind of weight settle upon me, not of battle, but of responsibility. Captain Vance, ever the professional, broke the silence. He cleared his throat softly. "Captain Mason," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's over. He's in custody." He walked over, his polished shoes making soft sounds on the linoleum floor. "He'll face both a court-martial for his crimes against the military and a civilian court for fraud and bigamy. With the evidence we have, he's looking at a very long time behind bars. His marriage to your daughter will be legally annulled. He can't hurt either of you ever again." My daughter. The words hung in the sterile air between us. They sounded foreign, like a language I hadn't spoken in 17 years, a lifetime ago. I looked at the weeping girl, a stranger who shared my blood, and the reality of Vance's words felt both painfully distant and terrifyingly close. I had won the battle, but the war, this new, undefined war, was just beginning. Major Rostova gave my shoulder a firm, reassuring squeeze. "I will leave you," she said, her Russian-American accent a comforting rumble. "This is a conversation for family." She and Vance exchanged a look, and he nodded, giving me a final, respectful glance before they both quietly exited the room, leaving the three of us alone in the aftermath. The silence that returned was different. It was awkward, filled with unspoken questions and 17 years of empty space. All I could hear was Sarah's muffled crying. I didn't know what to do. What does a mother say to the daughter she gave away? What words could possibly bridge a chasm that wide? I thought of a quote a chaplain once told me during a particularly dark time in Kandahar. "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I was free of Julian. But misery was a thick blanket suffocating the room. Slowly, I wheeled my chair closer to her. Every push of the wheels felt monumental. When I was just a few feet away, I stopped. My mind, usually so clear with tactical objectives, was completely blank. All I could think to ask was the most basic, primal question of a mother. Did he ever hurt you, Sarah?" My voice was raspy, unfamiliar to my own ears. She shook her head, not looking up. Her voice was a choked whisper, broken by sobs. No, not like that. She finally lifted her head, and her eyes, red-rimmed and swimming with tears, met mine. They were filled with so much confusion, so much pain. I don't know what to call you, she stammered. The raw honesty of it was a knife to the heart. My mom, my parents, the ones who raised me, they're wonderful people. I was just so curious about where I came from. Her words weren't an accusation, but they felt like one. They were a stark reminder of the life I hadn't been a part of the parents who had been there when I wasn't. 17 years of birthdays, holidays, scraped knees, and bedtime stories flashed before my eyes, a life I had no claim to. I knew, in that moment, that explanations and apologies were useless. They were just words, and words couldn't fix this. Not now. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reached for the plastic water pitcher on my bedside table. My hands were shaking slightly as I poured a cup, the simple action feeling impossibly clumsy. I wheeled the final foot toward her and held it out. Here, I said softly. Drink some water. You've been through a lot. She hesitated for a second, then reached out and took the cup from me. As she did, her fingers brushed against mine. The touch was fleeting, barely there, but it was electric. A tiny spark of connection in a vast darkness. It was the first time we had ever touched. It wasn't an embrace. It wasn't a hug. It was just the brief, awkward, and profoundly meaningful touch of two strangers, a mother and a daughter, building the very first fragile plank of a bridge across a 17-year abyss. The days that followed the explosion of my old life were strangely quiet. After the storm of Julian's arrest, a quiet, uncertain space began to form in my hospital room. And Sarah started to fill it. She came every day. At first, she would just sit quietly in the chair, as if unsure of her right to be there. But slowly, tentatively, we began to talk. We didn't start with the big things. We started with the small, forgotten pieces that make up a life. She told me about growing up on a farm in Minnesota, describing the smell of the earth after a spring rain and the biting cold of the winter wind coming off the plains. She talked about her adoptive parents, the quiet strength of her father's hands, the warmth of her mother's kitchen. I listened, hungry for every detail, painting a picture in my mind of the 17 years I had missed. In return, I shared pieces of my own scattered world. I told her about the suffocating heat of Afghanistan, but also about the incredible, star-filled sky in the desert at night. I told her about the strange, delicious sausage I ate from a street vendor in Germany and the cherry blossoms in Japan that looked like pink snow. I wanted her to see me not just as the soldier on the wall in my father's house or the broken woman in this bed, but as someone who had lived and seen things. Through these fragments of conversation, these small shared intimacies, the awkwardness began to melt away. I saw in her a quick wit and a gentle heart, a resilience that I recognized as a Mason trait. And I think, for the first time, she began to see the woman behind the uniform, the mother behind the myth. One afternoon, when the sun was casting long shadows across the room, she looked at me directly, her gaze unwavering. She asked the question I had been dreading since the moment I saw her. Why? The single word hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. The room was silent, save for the gentle hum of the medical equipment. I took a deep breath, the kind a soldier takes before stepping into the unknown. I didn't offer excuses. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just gave her the truth, as plainly and honestly as I could. I told her everything. About my father, the general, for whom the family name was a fortress to be defended at all costs. About the crushing pressure and the shame that had been piled onto the shoulders of a terrified 17-year-old girl. I told her about my mother's silent tears, a quiet protest that was never enough. I described the cold, sterile feel of the adoption agency, the finality in the click of the door as the nurse carried her away, leaving an emptiness in my arms that had never truly gone away. I promised him I would never look for you, I finished, my voice thick with unshed tears. He said my future was in the army and that the past would destroy it. For 17 years, I tried to be the perfect soldier to prove that my sacrifice, that our sacrifice, was worth it. Sarah listened without saying a word, her expression unreadable. When I was done, a long silence stretched between us. I braced myself for anger, for resentment, for the condemnation I knew I deserved. But it never came. Instead, she reached out and gently placed her hand on mine. My parents, she said softly, her voice clear and steady. They taught me that sometimes people have to make impossible choices. I'm not mad at you, I'm glad I finally found you. Her acceptance was a gift I never expected, a grace I hadn't earned. It broke something open inside of me, and for the first time since that IED blast, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. A few days later, a nurse came in with a hesitant smile. "Captain Mason, you have some visitors." An older couple stood in the doorway. The man was tall and lean, with kind weathered lines around his eyes and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime working the land. The woman beside him was shorter, with a warm, round face and a smile that seemed to reach all the way to her soul. Sarah stood behind them, looking nervous. "You must be Amy," the woman said, her voice gentle. "I'm Martha, and this is my husband, John. We're Sarah's parents." They drove 2 days straight from Minnesota the moment Sarah called them. They didn't come with accusations or anger, they came with open arms. Martha walked right up to my wheelchair and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of fresh laundry and cinnamon. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for bringing our daughter into the world." John shook my hand, his grip firm and sincere. "She's the greatest gift we've ever known," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family just got a little bigger today is all." And that's when I finally broke. Tears streamed down my face, not tears of pain or grief, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching gratitude. I'd been raised in a family of soldiers, built on duty and honor and secrets. But this was different. This was a family built on love. In losing the family I was born into, I had stumbled into the one I was always meant to find. Later that night, after they had all gone, I sat in the quiet darkness of my room. My Uncle Sterling's words echoed in my head. Build a life, not just follow orders. For the first time, I understood what he meant. My mission had changed. I picked up the burner phone Eva had given me and dialed. "Captain Vance," I said when he answered. "It's Amy Mason. I need you to start the paperwork. I want to formally recognize Serafina as my daughter. And I want to amend my uncle's will. The inheritance is to be split evenly between us. It's time to build a life. This is my most important mission now." The verdict from the medical board came on a quiet Tuesday morning. It wasn't a surprise, but the finality of it still hit me like a physical blow. The official language was cold and clinical. Permanent physical limitations. Cognitive deficits inconsistent with active duty requirements. It was a bureaucratic way of saying I was broken. The Army, the only real family, the only identity I had known for my entire adult life, was letting me go. I was to be honorably discharged with full medical retirement. A strange mix of relief and profound grief washed over me. Relief that the fight to reclaim my body was no longer tied to the pressure of returning to service. But the grief was a cavernous emptiness that opened up inside my chest. For 20 years, I had been Captain Amy Mason. I had a rank, a uniform, a mission. My life was defined by orders, by duty, by a clear chain of command. Now, the structure that had held me together was gone. The question echoed in the silent room, terrifying in its simplicity. Who was I if I wasn't Captain Mason? I found myself rereading Uncle Sterling's letter, his words now taking on a new, more urgent meaning. Use what I've left you to build a life of purpose, not just one of duty. My duty was ending. My purpose, I realized, was just beginning. The ceremony was held a week later in a small, quiet auditorium at Walter Reed. It wasn't a grand affair with a full formation, just a handful of officers, their faces respectful and somber. But the people who mattered most were there. Eva stood tall and straight, a pillar of strength. Captain Vance was there, his duty as my lawyer fulfilled, but his presence now one of a friend. And in the front row sat my new, improbable family. Sarah, flanked by her parents, John and Martha, who had driven all the way back from Minnesota just to be here for this. A two-star general, a man I'd never met but who spoke as if he knew my entire service record by heart, presided over the ceremony. He spoke of honor, of sacrifice. Then he stepped forward, holding a small velvet-lined box. He opened it, revealing the Purple Heart. He carefully pinned the medal to the lapel of my uniform jacket. The weight of it felt immense, a physical manifestation of the pain that had ended my career. It's the one medal no soldier ever wants to earn. Then came the flag. Two soldiers from the honor guard, their movements crisp and perfectly synchronized, unfolded the American flag to its full glory. They held it taut between them, a sea of stars and stripes. Then, with practiced, reverent precision, they began to fold it. 13 precise folds, each one steeped in tradition and symbolism, transforming the broad banner into a tight, blue triangle of stars. As I watched, a tear I hadn't expected escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. That flag wasn't just a symbol of my country, it was a symbol of my life, of 20 years of sweat, fear, and unwavering commitment. My entire youth was folded into those 13 creases. The soldier presented the folded flag to the general, who then turned and presented it to me. "Captain Mason," he said, his voice deep with respect. "On behalf of a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your honorable and faithful service." I took the flag into my hands. The weight of it was real, solid. I held my life's work in my lap. And in that moment, looking at the crisp, blue triangle, I knew what I had to do. This legacy wasn't just mine anymore. I turned my wheelchair to face my daughter. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide, sensing the shift in the room. I held the flag out to her. "Mom's mission is over now," I said, and the word mom felt more natural, more right than Captain ever had. "Now, we start a new one, together." Her hands trembled as she took the flag from me. She didn't just take it, she cradled it against her chest, her eyes shining with tears. She understood. She knew this wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a legacy, a history, a promise. It was the end of one story and the beginning of ours. From the corner of my eye, I saw Eva place a hand on my shoulder, a silent, powerful gesture of soldier-to-soldier understanding. The last day at Walter Reed felt surreal. I dressed not in a uniform, but in jeans and a simple sweater. The clothes of a civilian. A stranger. Sarah packed the last of my things while I sat in the wheelchair, the folded flag resting on my lap. Sarah pushed my chair down the long, sterile hallways for the last time. We passed the physical therapy room where I had sweat and cursed, the small auditorium where my career had officially ended, the room where my world had been torn apart and then, miraculously, put back together in a new and unexpected way. When we reached the main entrance, the automatic glass doors slid open, and the crisp autumn air hit my face. Freedom. It smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves. Sarah pushed me out into the sunlight. At the edge of the curb, I asked her to stop. I turned my head and looked back at the sprawling brick buildings of the hospital one last time. It was a fortress that had seen me at my absolute worst and had, against all odds, become the site of my rebirth. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the free air. It was terrifying. But it was also filled with a quiet, thrilling hope. The road ahead was a blank page, no map, no orders, no mission brief, just me and my daughter. The first time Sarah and I saw the Mason estate in the Hudson Valley, it was late October. The air was crisp with the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, and the rolling hills were ablaze in a riot of crimson, gold, and orange. It was a landscape so beautiful it hurt to look at, a world away from the sterile white walls of Walter Reed and the beige dust of Afghanistan. The house itself sat on a gentle rise, a grand old farmhouse with a wide, welcoming porch. It was sturdy and timeless, though neglected. Peeling paint, overgrown gardens. But it had good bones, as my Uncle Sterling used to say. It had history. Surrounding it were acres of apple orchards and sprawling fields. This was his legacy. This was our new beginning. Sarah, who had grown up surrounded by the flat, open plains of Minnesota, was enchanted. Her eyes, which had held so much pain, now sparkled with a light I hadn't seen before. "We could plant a flower garden right there," she said, pointing to a patch of overgrown weeds near the porch. "Peonies, and maybe some roses." For the first time since I'd left my childhood home, I felt a sense of belonging. I felt like I was truly home. The healing process was slow, both for my body and for our new, fragile relationship. But for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. Sarah was there for every grueling physical therapy session, her quiet encouragement a more potent balm than any pain medication. On days when the phantom pains in my leg were unbearable, she would simply sit with me, a silent, steady presence that anchored me to the present. Together, we started to breathe life back into the old house. We spent our days scraping away old paint, our conversations punctuated by the rhythmic sound of our tools. We chose new colors, a warm cream for the living room, a soft blue for the kitchen. We planted the first bulbs in Sarah's flower garden, our hands covered in rich, dark earth. It wasn't duty or discipline that was rebuilding our lives. It was laughter, patience, and the shared comfort of quiet, ordinary days. The house wasn't just being repaired, it was being filled with love, becoming a home. One afternoon, we took a break and drove to a local farm stand, coming back with a bag of still warm apple cider donuts and 2 steaming cups of cider. We sat on the porch steps, the sweet cinnamon scent mingling with the autumn air, and watched the sun dip below the hills. It was a simple, perfect moment of peace. It was during the process of finalizing the legal work with Captain Vance that the next chapter of my life began to take shape. As I waded through the paperwork of Julian's fraud, I saw just how vulnerable service members and their families could be. There were so many loopholes, so many ways for predators to exploit people who were distracted by grief, injury, or the stress of deployment. My own painful experience wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a call to action. Uncle Sterling wanted me to build a life of purpose. I realized my purpose wasn't just to heal myself, but to protect others from going through what I had. Using a portion of the inheritance, I started the legal process to establish a nonprofit organization, the Mason Foundation. The mission was simple and clear: to provide free legal and financial counseling to military families, protecting them from the kind of fraud that had nearly destroyed my life. I was no longer fighting an enemy overseas, I was fighting for the soldiers back home. The story ends 1 year later. It's a brilliant Saturday afternoon in early fall. I'm standing on the porch of the fully restored Mason house, leaning lightly on a simple wooden cane. The scent of barbecue is in the air, mixed with the sound of children's laughter and the easy murmur of conversation. The great lawn in front of the house is filled with people, veterans and their families, enjoying the first annual Mason Foundation community picnic. Sarah stands beside me, no longer a timid girl but a confident young woman, pointing out different families to me, her face alight with joy. She's found her own purpose here, helping to run the foundation, her natural empathy a gift to everyone she meets. I watch a young Marine with a prosthetic leg throwing a football with his son. I see a Gold Star wife laughing with another widow, finding a moment of shared understanding. I see Eva and Vance, who had driven up from DC, sharing a plate of food, looking completely at home. I am no longer Captain Amy Mason, the soldier defined by her duty. I am simply Amy Mason, a founder, a protector, a mother. I lost a career, I lost a marriage. But in the ruins, I found my daughter. I found a real family, larger and more loving than I could have ever imagined. And I found a new battle worth fighting. I look over at Sarah, and she smiles at me, a smile so full of light it could eclipse the sun. And I smile back, a deep, genuine smile of pure contentment. My final mission, it turned out, was just the beginning. Thank you for listening to my story. My final mission as a soldier is complete, but my mission in life has just begun. I've learned that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you were to become the person you were always meant to be. Our scars don't have to be the end of our story. They can be the map that leads us to our true purpose. If you believe in the power of starting over and finding strength in the aftermath, I would be honored if you'd follow our channel. We share stories of resilience like this every week because everyone's fight deserves to be heard.